A very good afternoon to all the participants who have joined today. And this is Venkatesh. I'll be your host today. And we sincerely welcome Dr. Sabyasachi Sengupta also. And a warm welcome to all the participants across the board. Quickly today, we are going to have an exclusive webinar on the path to publishing success, master the art of writing a manuscript. And we have Dr. Sabyasachi Sengupta, who is the associate editor of the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. And today we are going to talk about effective strategies for structuring research articles, tips on organizing bibliographic references, techniques to enhance manuscript coherence, exclusive insights on leveraging tools, and all your questions are going to be answered too. Before getting on to the session, this event it's conducted by Nimbus in association with the Cactus Global. And quickly, before starting the session, I quickly want to introduce Dr. Sabyasachi Sengupta. Uh, to start with, today I'm going to just give a small brief. Nevertheless, he has got an immense amount of experience in the field of research, and especially to talk about Dr. Sen Gupta. He's currently the associate director of the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. And Dr. Sen Gupta also did his doctoral research fellowship at the world-renowned Wilmer Eye Institute at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, Baltimore, USA. He also did a one-year course in biostatistics at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, Johns Hopkins University. During his stint at Hopkins, Dr. Sengupta was exposed to a very systematic and organized way of doing research. This is the experience that he's going to share with us today. And he was fortunate to be mentored by very experienced and renowned researchers at Hopkins, like Dr. Pradeep Romulu, Chief Glaucoma Service, and Dr. Friedman, Head Dana Center. This experience made Dr. Sengupta very well versed with the infrastructure and support required to conduct world-class clinical research, which he aspires to catalyze in India and the rest of the developing world. And we sincerely welcome you, Dr. Sengupta, and the platform is yours. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Venkatesh. And it's a real pleasure for me to come here and address all of you in the session. So I'm going to quickly share my screen. Before that, I wanted to know how many of you are in the medical field. So if you could share a poll as to how many of you are from the medical field and how many of you are not, it would actually help me. All right. Okay, this sounds good. So I'm going to start my session. All right, so we are going to talk a little bit about writing and structuring your manuscript for publication success. And so I'm from the medical field. I'm an eye specialist or an ophthalmologist, and so I'm going to really speak to you from a medical perspective. But then most of the principles that we're discussing are really applicable to pretty much any field of academics that you're looking to write papers and publish your manuscript. So I hope it will be generally applicable. Before I generally start, I like to start with an inspiration. So the here I thought of putting this up. The questions you ask define who you are and not the answers you know. So if you think about it, it's a very deep thought where the more questions you ask, uh, you know if you ask 10 questions, maybe one will be the right one for you to keep asking again and again. And if you can't find answers to that in published literature, then you would want to sort of pursue that question and find answers to that yourself, and from your own research, right? So then I think the first step to doing good research and writing papers is to keep asking questions. And don't be worried whether they are the right or the wrong questions. There are never wrong questions. So keep asking questions, and then some of them are going to be the right ones. So the roadmap to publish essentially goes through three very simple steps. First, what you do is, once you have that inspiration or that idea in mind, you plan and execute your actual study. Then you have your data with you, which you analyze and you write it up. then you actually review it a couple of times with your co-authors and your colleagues who have done it with you. Then you submit it to a journal and then it gets published, right? So this is essentially the overall roadmap to publish. However, before getting into all these nitty-gritties, I think Mr. Venkatesh has already introduced me to you. So I did my basic research training from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and the Bloomberg School of Public Health. And that institution was very much in the limelight during the COVID times. Where we used to get numbers updated on a daily basis as to where and which country is having large numbers, and and where there are more deaths, and that was done all at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. So I owe pretty much everything I know from to that institutions. I have so far more than 100 publications to my credit. I assist papers in people to write papers through my Sengupta Research Academy. I'm the associate editor of the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology, and I have been named in the Stanford University top 2% list of doctors. It's not just doctors; it's actually scientists all over the world, and that is based on citations. Hopefully I'll be able to give you a unique perspective on publishing from an author's point of view, and then from a reviewer's point of view, and then finally from an editor's point of view. So I would request all of you to turn off your mobiles, or at least mute them. Feel free to note down your queries and keep writing them in the Q&A section. We'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So, like I said, before we get into the nitty-gritties, I quickly wanted to play a movie clip that has been my inspiration for over a decade now. So just take a quick look. So there's a very famous film in Hindi film called "Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara," which means that you're not going to get your life back again. So for this clip has really inspired me, and that eagerness in your heart, and to keep going and doing more is it's what research is all about for me. Before we dive down into actual writing the paper, let's quickly look at how medical practice will look like in 2030. And this is not just medical practice. I think it is across industries and across many faculties. So it's almost impossible to detect how this is going to change. And the key word here is automations, right? Because as you know, automations are really revolutionizing pretty much everything that we are doing today, with a lot of chat gpt and all these coming in and taking away a lot of things that we were used to doing ourselves, right? So a quick idiom would be to not put all your eggs in one basket. So if you are doing one faculty, try and inculcate more and more new things. Doing any kind of research and writing or publishing papers is a new faculty that you should probably think about investing time and learning, rather than sticking to only one faculty that you are good at. So there are different AI is assisting us, but soon we will be going to the next phase of partial automations, right? So and then there may be full automations, and we may actually look like this. A physician or a surgeon like me may actually look like this in 2030, where we are actually just looking at a very large screen and just folding my hands with gloves on, and not really doing much because all the entire machines are doing these things. And actually in my field of ophthalmology, there are already machines which can do almost the entire surgery. You may have heard about surgeries which take off your power, and that don't need to wear spectacles. That's a procedure called smile. That is sort of entirely automated nowadays. Almost 90% of it is at least automated. So this day is not really far away. And AI is everywhere. So AI will change the interaction between doctors and patients. Most patients may not even know that it's involved in the back end or in the decision making. And this is, like I said, across faculties in banking or in finance, or in many times we apply for a loan in a bank, and sometimes it may get rejected. And if you ask the banker why is it getting rejected, they'll say, oh, it's a system which says you're not eligible. But that system at the back end really is that AI which is working day and night. So AI is really everywhere. Is it really good or bad? For the consumer, or in my case for the patients, it's definitely good. But it's not so good for the physician, or the person who is providing the service, right? There are of course pros and cons, but it's not really so good for us, because a lot of automations are going to take away a lot of the things or the decisions that we were making. This is a great book by Yuval Noah Harari, who is a historian, and book is titled 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And if you haven't read it, trust me, you're missing something. So, and it's a must read. The first chapter that he talks about is, he coins the term EdMed, where education and medicine are going to change change in a way which we cannot widely guess at present. So automations is something that it really talks about. So how can we be prepared? AI integrations into medicines cannot be stopped. All diagnostics, radiology or so many other fields, such as diabetology, diabetic care, are all amenable to. They are all creating a lot of data and data points, and all of these can be utilized into creating an AI which is stronger than any physician or any diagnostician. However, this won't happen overnight. The good news is that it is still evolving. So we are in a phase where things are moving. We can assist this evolution and be part of it rather than against it. Because it's almost impossible to negate a Google or an Apple when they come up with technology. We really can't oppose that. So the main question is, can I be part of this, right? I mean, can I benefit from being part of this? So you have to understand that being part of this means breaking barriers. You need to do newer things, and remember that these technologies, when they're evolving, they need to be validated, right, before they are actually fielded into the market. So then who will be asked to validate? You need to think that people who are key opinion leaders, or people who are good with in their field or at the highest level of their fields, are going to be recruited and asked to validate these new softwares which are coming up. So you need to really think about new ways to win. This is another great book by Michael O'Grady called Think Smart and Work Smart. So working hard is not good enough nowadays. You need to work smart as well. So it's another great read. So basic idea really is to be part of this. So first thing is, you need to train yourself with data. Because data is the new currency now. You need to learn a little bit about some analytics and some statistics, learn to present data well, and then learn to write well, and then make an impression. So these are few things which a lot of industries are looking for, these skills in people. So these are multidisciplinary skills and will help you go ahead. And what are the skills required to do research and publish a paper? These are the same skills which you will need to write and publish papers, right? So and also, who are the ones who will be chosen by the industry to validate these new technologies? Also are the ones who have published papers, who are considered as experts in the field. So all is going to start from how many papers, or how you are publishing, and how your reputation is growing in the academic world. And so think about publishing papers, if you haven't done so. So be good at medical research or any research in whatever field you may be, then be prepared for tomorrow. Right. So this is me being prepared since 2008. And so I did a research methodology workshop way back in 2008 during my training days. This was at Arvindai Hospital in Madurai. And then I did a lot of training courses. So I did the 3-day course. Then I went to Christian Medical College at Vellore, and I did the 1 week course. Then now that I went to the Wilmara Institute at Johns Hopkins, and I did more than a year's course there. I learned biostatistics writing, and during editorship at the Indian Journal, I'm still kind of learning. So it's very important to get trained in basic concepts, and it's really easy nowadays with a lot of technology which is available. There are a lot of courses available online, like Researcher Life and so many others are offering some extremely high quality courses which you can think about. There are a lot of students online who are looking to talk to others and brainstorm. So you can join Facebook groups, or look at Twitter and look at hashtags, and start being part of those kind of discussions. And there is a lot of mentors also who are now available to teach you, but the caveat is to choose wisely. So this is so with this background, sort of, there is a huge need now to actually do research and write papers. So why should I publish is from your own individual point of view, which we'll quickly look at. Then we'll look at some of the other questions. So before that, what are medical journals? Some of you may be, of course, aware, and some of you may not be. So generally, journals are where all the research that you're doing are getting published. And some of the top journals in medicine are the New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, the Journal of the American Medical Association, the British Medical Journal, etc. So these are some of the top journals that most authors aspire to get into. And when you're looking to do a study, there are many different types of studies with different study designs that you can do. At the bottom are animal and laboratory studies, which are quite difficult to do, and they require a lot of support. Case reports and case series are some are shorter reports which you can do. They don't require any formal design. Then comes case control studies, then comes cohort studies which are prospective, then come on top of that comes randomized control trials, and then the highest level of evidence is gained by doing a meta-analysis or systematic review. Remember that you should start small, but then go up the ladder. You should aspire to do more studies or larger papers as you go along. So this is basically what I think we should all aspire to be, where we are writing relatively smaller reports in the beginning, gaining experience on how to write, and then writing major reports. So quickly look at why we should publish. Remember, the work that remains unpublished in one form or the other is essentially incomplete or undone. Because if you're doing a thesis or you're doing a proper study in your department and you're not publishing it, most people won't know, right, what you've done and what are the importance of what you've done. So it's important to publish. Unfortunately, in India, at least this is from the medical field, where if you look at theses which are done by postgraduates in medicine, very few get published. And the reasons are it's not novel enough, the design is improper. We can go on and on. There's a lot of apathy. People are not aware of these benefits which are coming in the future. So most theses don't get published. One We did a small study back in 2010, where we looked at the national conference and how many papers from that are actually making it to peer reviewed publications. We found that only 12% from an Indian all India conference is getting published. When we look at continental meetings like the Asia Pacific meetings or some of these, about 30%. And we look at really international level meetings which happen in the Europe or in the US, about 60% papers which are actually being presented in these conferences go on to get published, right? So I think the overall one second. So I think the overall onus is really on us to improve these qualities. So this is a quick mnemonic of why you should do research, right? So the mnemonic is famous, if you see on the left. So FAMOUS. So it's just to to sort of gain your attention. But fame is of course one part of it, but not the entire thing. So don't take it literally. But F stands for fame and recognition, which is obvious, because meaningful research makes impact, and it gains your peers' respect, and then it brings you fame and recognition. A stands for patient care, or any care that you're trying to improve. So some pivotal research studies have the potential to enhance patient care, and some of your studies could influence millions of lives. A quick anecdote is, when I was at Johns Hopkins in training, I saw a very large board at outside the School of Public Health, which said, changing lives millions at a time. And on the day one, I sort of thought that this is an overestimation, and sort of Americans are good salesmen, and that's why they've put these these posters up. However, as I got to know their work, I found that some of the studies have changed the entire immunization schedule of Egypt. Some of the studies have led to eradication of some diseases in Africa, like trachoma and some of the others. So they really are saving million lives, millions at a time. And during COVID, studies which have come out from Johns Hopkins have really saved millions of lives. So some pivotal studies could do that. M is to make yourself a good clinician, or a good a good at in your field, right? So because there are a lot of deliberations which happen during the review process, and they keep making you think, right? Why this, why not that, and that helps you improve in your daily vocation. Sometimes your papers can influence policy decisions. So these impactful papers help administrators make policy decisions, allocate funds to public welfare projects. So don't think that your papers are going to be read only by your peers. Sometimes the prime minister could also read your paper. Sometimes Supreme Court judges read your papers and pass judgments. A lot of your papers are read by IAS officers, and because they are not primarily trained in that field, but they are still the decision makers, right? So policy decisions really can be impacted by, you might think small work that you're doing, but a lot of policy decisions are impacted. Of course, there is funding and grants. So your research makes you eligible to apply for large grants. So in the US, the top grant, which is called the RO1 grant, is $1 million grant, which keeps recurring for 5 years. There are very large grants from the Indian Council of Medical Research, and of course DBT, DST, and all of these large government organizations. So I'm sure some of you have heard about these. So so funding and grants is part of doing this. And the personal index, by that I mean is citations of your papers. So the number of citations your paper has, that means the number of times your paper is being part of others bibliography or other references, right? So that really means that you are doing enough good work, that your people, that people are referring to your paper and then basing their act or their own research based on your study. So that's a really big prestigious issue. And this citations is being used by the Stanford University for the last 3 years, and they are coming up with sort of the top 2 percentage of scientists all over the world in all different specialties, not just in medicine. And that means if your name is in that, your paper is getting cited a lot of times. So some of my so last year I had more than 2000 citations to all my papers all put together, right? So it's a relatively large number. So that means there is a lot of impact that a paper are creating. Some examples, this is one of my papers published in 2010, where we looked at certain specific eye diseases. And I have gotten emails from all across the world saying that this is really how it is, and we never knew this, and after your paper things have changed, we know how to manage this before vision is lost and other things. This is another example how you can influence evolution of literature for a particular disease which may be slightly new. So this is pardon me for being very specific with examples, but so this is a disease called toxic anterior segment syndrome. It's a particular problem in the eye, and doesn't happen very commonly. So this was a paper published in 2011 by me and my associates. And then this is a paper that I have reviewed on the same topic. This is in 2019. Over the last 10 years, I myself have reviewed about 50 papers on this. That's about 5 papers a year on this entity, and so have my co-authors. So can you imagine the impact that all of us have had on how this disease entity has evolved over time, right? So if I say, oh, this paper isn't good enough, it is rejected, this high likelihood that that paper could get rejected, and then most of the world will not hear about this at all, right? So then if you are doing very niche work in some field, then you are actually even without knowing, you may be influencing a lot of literature over time. Of course, like I said, there is grants and funding, fame and recognition. There is a lot of imbalance where 90% of the world population lives in the developing world, that is our world, but 90% of papers are published from the developed world. So the overall onus is really on us to sort of get this balance right. So unless we start doing a lot of research and publishing papers, this is also always going to remain skewed in the Western world's favor. So, overall take home message from this, I think, if there is one take home message from why we should do research, it's like going beyond one patient. Or in your case, if you are not in the medical field or you are in different fields, you could really impact a very large number of people in the real world, right? By publishing meaningful work. So it's really important to think the or see the larger picture of how much impact you can make. And really it's all about leaving behind a legacy sometimes. So this doing research and publishing papers is one avenue which you can really do that from. And so we looked at why we should publish. Now let's look at a few questions of how we should do this. uh, so this is another way of looking at the pipeline of how a research project goes through. So you get an idea or an inspiration, then you design a study around that idea to so to ask a question, and then what is the study design that will help you answer that question. Then once you do the study, you gain data, you execute the study, and you have data, so you do analysis, you apply statistics to it, and then you write the paper and publish it. So there are some best practices with journals and others. So what we are looking at today is writing and publishing. However, we don't have enough time to go into all of these details, and maybe we could have future lectures for this. I thought I'll quickly give you an idea of some basics of the design, which because they are also helpful when you write the paper. So this is a mnemonic that we follow when you're designing any study, more so in the medical field, but also generally in most other fields this is applicable. So it's called the PICO or the PICOT approach, where all of these are standing. These are all, it's a mnemonic. P, so P stands for participants, right? So participants really means inclusion and exclusion, right? So who are you studying and who are you not studying? right? So it really depends upon how much applicability you want to have for your study later on. So if you study a very small number of people, or a very particularly, a very niche group of people, then your results will be applicable only to that very niche group of people. So the impact may not be very large, right? So it's good to have a little broad inclusion. So but then think about whom are you studying and whom are you not studying. I stand for the intervention. Some people also call it E for exposure. That means, so intervention always doesn't mean actually going and doing something, or doing an operation or doing a surgery. So I really means, what is the tool you're using to gain the data, or what is the tool you're going to use to collect data. It could be a simple questionnaire where people are answering that question, and then you're gaining data out of that. It could be a drug therapy, it could be surgery, or anything else that you're exposing your participants to. So think about it from a very, you know I mean, if you are using a questionnaire, is the questionnaire good enough? Is it good enough to answer that question that we wanted to? So these are few things you really need to think about. C stands for a comparison group. So does your study need a comparison group, right? It could be an active or a passive comparison. It really essentially means, what is being done currently, or what is the current practice which is established for, or for a particular disease entity. Or it need not just be medicine. Anything, say you're writing a new software code, and is it actually better than what was done in the past? So chat gpt 4 is way better than chat gpt 3. But then, if you did not compare across the two, how would you know one is better than the other, right? So having a comparison group is really important. So if you say in the medical field there is a new surgery which is being done, or a new machine for, say, say urinary stones, and that machine melts stones without doing much from the outside. But the established practice is to do something more invasive. So that's called lithotripsy. So if the established field is a surgery, and you are trying to do something new which is non-surgical, unless you compare across the two, how will you know the new one is as good as, or even better than what was existing, right? So think about having a comparison group right from the beginning. We cannot undo this. If you don't have a comparison group from the beginning, you can't undo this later on, right? So always think about whether you need a comparison group. If you're not sure, always include a comparison group. O stands for outcome measures, where you really need to define that outcome measure very well. So this is really, in other words, what is your study question? How is your study question framed, and how have you defined all of those? And remember that outcome measure, the most important outcome measure, is called a primary outcome measure, right? So that is the key question, or one most important question that your study is trying to answer. Of course, you may answer many more questions around that also. So they are called secondary outcome measures, right? And so think about how you are defining them well, and how you are going to capture those outcomes, and then how you are going to analyze that. Then T stands for type of studies, where the common ones are prospective versus retrospective studies. Now this is mostly specific to medicine, but so what are prospectives and retrospective studies? So prospective means you're going ahead in time, that outcome hasn't happened, right? So you're looking at two groups of people, or rather you're looking at a group of people who are exposed to a particular risk, and maybe another group which is not exposed to a particular risk, say smoking. And then, so you have a group of smokers and you have a group of non-smokers, and you follow them up over a period of 8 years, 10 years, and see how many are getting lung cancer in each group. You expect smokers to get more lung cancer, but that may not always be true. So the classical example of a prospective study is the lung cancer study. That's how lung cancer was attributed to smoking, right? Retrospective study means when you're looking back, where the outcome has already happened. So here we can find out risk factors for that outcome, right? So looking back is retrospective. Of course, better studies are randomized controlled trials, where that bias is taken off by a process called masking. Again, also think about your sample size. How many subjects or participants you want to have a robust kind of outcomes. Then also think about your own limitations, or your own institutional limitations, perhaps. Can the study be done in my own institution, in my own setting, and at a reasonable cost? So these are some of the things that you have to think about when you're designing your study. So we have looked at the design. Now let's actually talk about writing and publishing your paper. Remember that key to publication is writing the manuscript. Of course, doing the study well, designing to execution to statistical analysis is really important, but it really boils down to how you write your manuscript, right? So it really, writing a manuscript is like giving shape to your ideas. It's not really easy to put it all on a blank sheet of paper. It takes time and it takes expertise to write. Basics are, always choose a journal before you start to write, or at least have a target journal before you start to write. That's because, remember that all journals have different word limits. Different journals want different headings in the way they want their paper. The author instructions will give you these details. So you need to have that journal in mind, at least one or two important journals in mind, and read their author guidelines, which is there on their websites, right? So there you need to look at what is the word limit, what are the headings, what are the guidelines for making tables, figures, and the artwork that you're going to submit. And of course, references, what are the in what way do they want their references to be, right? So before before writing, it's important to have these. I'll give you some examples of my own, where I have written a paper which was very detailed, and it was description of two or three very rare cases. And I ended up writing 2000 words, and I was really happy and content looking at the volume that I had written out. But then when I went to submit to a journal, one journal said, oh, we accept only 900 words. Other very top journal said, we accept only 500 words. Just imagine sort of cutting down those 2000 words to 500 words. That's like one fourth, right? That's a lot of work. And and that you have put in a lot of pain to go and create that 2000 word document. Now bringing it down to the word limit for the journal becomes very difficult. That's why it's always good to have these limits in mind before you start to write. This is a very good website. So this is followed by most medical editors, including myself. This is the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. That's ICMJE. You can just Google it up, and on the front page, this is the screenshot of their homepage. So this talks about recommendations for writing, and when you click this browse, you will come to this page, and where this talks about preparing a manuscript for submission to a medical journal. And this gives you all these details about title page, abstract, introduction. So you can actually scroll this down. It's a relatively long kind of document, but you can download it as well. And so this is a free reference that you can use. And most journals, like so medical journal editors and medical journals, use these guidelines, and so it's important to do this. So essentially, what this talks about is the title page. Where what a title page constitutes is the author names, their affiliations, that means which institutions they belong to, a running title, the word count of your paper, and the addresses for communication. Right. So if you're a communicating, or if you're a corresponding author, it will be your address, email, and phone number. Then you need to have conflict of interests declared, if at all there are any. Then what follows is the abstract. It needs to be concise and precise. We'll talk a little bit more about abstract. The manuscript body then needs to be submitted. Then you have to submit your tables and figures, right? So all pages should be with double spacing and uniform font size 12, right? So this is essentially what the ICMJE guidelines want us to do. Remember that writing process goes through a lot of phases, and it's not that you start writing first and the first time everything looks perfect. It doesn't happen that way. So initially you plan, and you actually analyze, and you write your report. Then set a framework for all your documents, the outlines, the headings, after looking at the journal instruction for authors. Then generally we write the first draft, right? So if you're the PI, or the the principal investigator, and you are the main one conducting the study, you will write the first draft. It's important to not take a lot of time to write this, but then it could be grotty, right? It is not going to be the final draft. So just put down everything that you want to actually represent in the paper. And you can use checklists and instruction to authors to write that. And then I generally sit on it for a week, and then come back to it, and then I improve on it. You make a presentable second draft, and then you circulate it to your co-authors. Maybe there are 6 or 7 others who are part of your of the authorship. So send it to them. Write a good third draft, because all their inputs will come in, and there will be changes here and there. Once that is done, then you can circulate again to your co-authors, and then make an excellent fourth draft, and then the final document for submission. So you can polish it up. you can use some checklists, which I will show you a little later. So this is essentially how it goes through. It takes about 2 to 3 months, and it should not take more time. It should not take less time either. So I think about 2.5 to 3 months is a good enough time where you start writing from a blank page to how you finish your document. So there are so many different types of manuscripts, original articles, case reports, letter to editors, and so many others. But what we're really going to concentrate today is on the original article, right? That is a whole full study that you're doing, or an epidemiologic survey, or things like that, right? So this is what we'll actually look at. So there's a very specific format that is used to write original articles. That format is called the IMRAD format, IMRAD, where I stands for introduction, M stands for materials and methods, R stands for discussion, R stands for results, and D stands for discussion, right? So that A is basically and, right? So introduction, materials and methods, results, and discussion. So how to write the introduction. And the first thing is introduction. So remember that it should be very relevant, right? And the goal of writing the introduction is to narrow down the reader's attention to your topic of interest. Look at a concise review of literature, what has already been done. So the idea is to, so sort of imagine a Google map. And so if you are wanting to go to a particular place, that map is going to zoom in, and that is it is going to zoom in and reach that place, and show you directions on how to get there. So that's essentially what you have to do. So highlight the lacuna in literature and hence give the rationale for your study. That's really important, right? So lacuna is a gap in literature, or what has not been done. So this has to be right from the beginning, where you're designing your study, or that study question. It should be highlight. It should be targeting a gap in literature, right? And then why is your question important or interesting one for the readership, right? So these are two non-negotiable parts of a introduction. So I'll show you one of my own papers. It was published a while back. So this talks about this is a comparative study of outcomes of pigmented versus non-pigmented keratomycosis. So this is fungal infection of the eye, and caused by two kinds of fungus, one which produces pigment versus one which does not produce pigment, right? So fungal infections, these kind of funguses can affect any part of the body. So initially we talk about corneal blindness. That's a part of the eye which is getting that infection. So it's a relatively broad way to start. Then we talk about one of the funguses, pigmented fungi, right? And we talk a little bit about that. Then we introduce the other kind of fungus that we're talking about. So this is non-pigmented fungi. And then we talk about, except for one large series, rest of the literature on pigmented keratitis is only case reports. So there's very little literature which is there on this. And and also you say that this is the actual gap in literature, right? So so very little is known about the outcomes of one versus the other, right? It could be, so this is not, we're not going into the nitty gritties of this, but comparison of both of these has not been done. Very little is known about one group, and a comparison between the two groups has never been done, and therefore the purpose of the study was to whatever. So these are some terminologies which should always be there in your paper. Say, little is known about, whatever, and that what follows later is almost the title of your paper, right? So very little is known about my study, or what I'm studying, and therefore the purpose of this study was to, so this is why is it important for people to read. So these are two things which should always be there. From an editor's point of view, when I'm looking at a paper, I don't really go through the entire paper before sending it out to peer review. What I'm looking at is the introduction and only the last couple of paragraphs of an introduction. So if if this is there, or the gap in literature is highlighted and the purpose of the study has been mentioned, then I will send it out for peer review. But if that is not there, I will reject it outright. And so that's called an editorial rejection. And almost 30% papers that are submitted to journals get rejected right at the editorial stage. That's because some of these basics are not there in the paper. Coming to the IMRAD, second thing is M, that is materials and methods. So this is a sort of checklist that you can use. Write one or two sentences about each part of these, and then your whole method is ready. So first thing we need to write about is, was there any ethics clearance or ethics committee, which is essential to do in medical studies, where you're that there is an ethics committee of an institution and you need to get their clearance before you start doing a study. Then you talk about the study period, month and year, and location and type of your study, this prospective, retrospective, etc. Then you talk about the inclusion and exclusion. Then you talk about sample size, whether randomization or masking was done, and then how data was collected. So you looked at case files, or how you did that. Then what clinical tests or investigations were done at each visit. So again, not specific for any branch, but for any study you would do some tests, say an ultrasound or an ECG, or whatever that may be, at every stage. So what are the tests that were done at baseline and then at every visit. And then the execution protocol. Now this will be done only for prospective studies because this is going ahead in time. And then what parameters were recorded, how many study visits were included, so 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, whatever that may be. And then you talk about outcome measures, and you need to define those well. So writing about the outcome measures and defining it really well and giving it a whole heading of itself makes a good impression. So so it's important to do that. And then comes the section on statistics, which either you can write or you can ask your biostatistician to write this. Remember that the materials and methods should be descriptive enough to enable other investigators to reproduce the study protocol, right? So but then it should not be too long, and a lot of mundane instructions need not be there, right? So it should be descriptive enough for others to reproduce the study. But then if you are missing out certain important aspects, say how was masking done, that needs to really be part of the methods, right? Otherwise others may not be able to replicate it. So it's a good idea to show your method section to someone else and ask them, will you be able to replicate this, or do you need any more information? So that's a good way to write the methods. It's always a good idea to use flow plans to show the methods in one go, right? So this is a randomized, this is a study. So this is numbers randomized, and then there are two groups, and what was done. So this is a flow plan. So this is one of my own papers. So I use this kind of flow plan where I talk about enrollment, intervention, and analysis. And at each step, so I pretty much tell everything that was done, right? So this is informed consent was taken, then inclusion, exclusion. So this is really the PICO approach I talked to you about. So inclusion, exclusion, then I is the intervention. So this is randomization. So these are the three groups. So this is the intervention, and one of these are the control groups. And then below you talk about outcomes, right? So this is one more of my papers. Again, it talks about enrollment, intervention, and analysis, right? So again, inclusion and exclusion. Again, there are two groups which were there were two groups in the study. And then what was done at each visit, and how analysis was done. So it's a good idea to show a flow plan. So you really need to think about how you can make your own flow plans. So this may look like a very complicated flow plan to you. However, when you look at the methods of the paper, that entire methods is so this is a very large randomized trial in management of diabetic eye disease, which we actually now use. So if not for this chart, it was almost impossible for us to go through a 40-page document, which was talking about the methods of this paper, right? So it's a good idea to always have this kind of algorithm or a flow chart so that others can easily use and understand your study. Coming to the results of your paper, so again, this is sort of a template which you can use to write the result section of your paper. So the first thing that we do in results is to mention the sample size over the study period. We included, say, 200 patients over this 36-month study period, or whatever that may be. Then you talk about the demographics of the patient population, right? It's always good to present that in a table form. Mention the important one in words, right? So the first table generally is about demographics, so age, gender, and baseline characteristics of the group or groups that you're studying. And then for a comparative study, so study which has a comparison group, it's always better to have a study which has a comparison group, like I already told you. So for a comparative study, mention whether two groups are comparable or not, right from the baseline. Then you need to write the results of your primary outcome measure. That's why it's very important to define this primary outcome right at the outset. So if sometimes we start writing results in the way the statistician has given us, and then the primary outcome is the last paragraph of your result section, which is not always good, right? So it's important that after the demographics or the baseline characteristics, you mention about primary outcome, and then you talk about secondary outcomes, whatever that may be. So so complications of a surgery or a procedure, or what didn't work, if you want to give out that information. and then tabulate your results, use graphs, pie diagrams, all meaningful charts. So these are some, these very high quality figures. Remember that if you are wanting to publish a figure or a photograph like this, it should be acquired in high resolution. Then acquiring it in low resolution, like with your phone or something, it sometimes is very low resolution, and then that resolution cannot be changed. uh, so at resolution, generally journals want it at, so this is 300 dots per inches. So 300 dpi resolution is essential for most journals to publish. Otherwise, they all get pixelated and they don't show well on print, right? So this is one small hair from an insect which goes into the eye, if you see here. And then when we remove it and look at it at 40x magnification, this is how it looks like, right? It looks like an arrow that has been fired, and it goes into the eye and causes all sorts of problems, right? So especially when you're looking for pathology or some of the other fields, images really had to be very high resolution. This is another example. So this is, that same example, which talked about fungal infection in the eye. This is how it looks like. This is a sort of black patch on the surface of the eye, and this is caused by one of the funguses. So if images are not taken in high resolution, it's difficult to get published. Make meaningful graphs. This is just a line diagram, which also shows different pressure in the eye. It's like blood pressure. Same way there is intraocular pressure, and it is measured at different times for this. If you see, there are these extensions around these points. So these could be, something like confidence intervals or standard deviations, whatever. But then without these, it's very difficult to understand the whole, distribution of the data. So imagine this graph without these ticks pointing out in either direction. A lot of information is hidden in that. So make meaningful graphs. So this is a line diagram with a confidence interval or a standard deviation. This is another example of what is called a lowest curve. Like I said, we don't have a lot of time to get into nitty gritties of these. So imagine this diagram without these lines, and they all look scattered, right? So this is actually a scatter plot, and you can't understand if there is any relationship between. So this is gestational age, and this is birth weight of babies. Gestational age is week at what they were born. So normally babies will be born at 36 weeks and beyond. So this is for babies which are born prematurely, and their birth weight is also going to be low. Normal, at least minimum birth weight is 2,500 grams or 2.5 kilos. So if you see, there are some babies which are born at, so this is from my own paper which is published. So there are some babies which are born at 600 grams. It's like really small, and say 27 weeks. That's just about 6.5 months. So but if this lines were not there, it's almost impossible to sort of understand what is happening, right? So make meaningful curves. This is called box and whisker plots, which are used, again, to show different kinds of we don't have a lot of time, like I said, to go into these things. But so these are all meaningful graphs which should be part of your your statistician will be the best person to tell you, how do you represent your data. Then coming to the discussion, which is the last part of your paper, remember it has to be very focused. So in the IMRAD, the last is D, that is discussion. So discussion is a very critical part of your paper. It recaps the methods in short and summarizes the positive findings of your study. That's the first paragraph of your paper should be a recap of everything that you've done and what you've actually found, and what are the things you want to discuss, right? So the positive findings of the study are all part of the first paragraph of the discussion, right? Then you can compare the outcomes with similar studies from literature, and you need to say whether your outcomes or what you have found are similar to other studies or different from other studies, right? So if they're similar to other studies, it's relatively easy. But if you have found different from what others have said in the past, then it's a bit of a problem, right? So you need to postulations or reasons for these differences. Sometimes you could say that, oh, mine is a much larger sample size with a much longer follow up, so I am right. But then you remember that you are actually criticizing the previous study, right? So avoid harsh criticisms. In case of agreements, of course, mention that too. Then you need to mention the advantages and drawbacks of your own study, right? So once you do that, then you can talk about the conclusions and future research scope in the field. So most top journals will have papers which end with future research scope in the field. So most top journals are also looking for this. So remember that to write a discussion well, this is generally the template that we follow. So success really depends upon your materials and methods and how well you have designed that study. and how well you have analyzed it. Then it depends upon the discussion, and only then it depends upon the results. So you may have a result which is contrary to what you started out with. You have a belief in the beginning or a hypothesis. Your results have not shown those to be true, right? So you have actually contradicted your own self. But so that's called kind of a negative study. Many times these kind of studies are also published, of course. But what I'm trying to say is that the results are things that the editor will look at much later. Initially they will look at the materials and methods. If the methods are not in place and not done well, it's very difficult to go ahead and get published. So most people do their study well and discuss their study or their results well in light of what is existing in literature, right? So these are the two main things that you should sort of concentrate on when you're writing a paper. So this is the IMRAD, that is introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Let's come to the abstract. Abstract is basically a standalone. Uh, it's a abstract really means everything in short, right? So that somebody who wants to just get a quick idea of what you have done can do it, very quickly. So it's really is a resume for everything that you have done, right? It generally it's a good idea to write it after the completion of the entire manuscript, right? That's because you now have a good grasp of what your paper is saying and what you want to say. Tell your reader what you actually did in this study, what you want to communicate via this paper. And remember that most readers will read the abstract only, and that too they'll read just the introduction and the conclusions of the abstract. So write the abstract very well. If the abstract is written well, then the reader who is finally reading your paper will actually want to read the full text, and then they may want to do another study which is similar to yours. So writing abstract is really important. There are two real types of abstracts which I have found in my own experience as an associate editor. One is an informative abstract. It extracts everything relevant for the paper, and it serves as a highly aggregated substitute for the full paper. So if you just read the abstract, almost everything that you need to understand is there in that paper. And other type of abstract is an indicative or a descriptive kind of abstract. It describes the content of the paper or just gives you an outline. They say, this was done and this is kind of what we found. It does not substitute. You will get a lot more information when you read the whole paper. So informative abstract is really what most editors are looking for, and so are the readership. And an indicative abstract is something that people don't always want to see. I'll give a quick example. People say, one group, patients in one group was older than the other group, right? The informative abstract will actually tell you the mean age of that group one and the mean age of that other group and the p value. But in indicative abstract will not tell you those. They'll just tell you one group was older than the other. So there are basic some subtle differences. uh, you know it's important to write the abstract in four sort of different headings, which is very similar to the IMRAD format. The first one is the background, that is the statement of the purpose. Why do we care about the problem and the result? So what is the background, why you need to do the study? Then you talk about the aim, you know that is the question that you're trying to solve. Then you talk about the methods, that is the approach, what you did to solve the problem. Then you talk about the results, what is the answer to that problem. So you pose the question, you tell the methods that you use to solve that, or find answers to that question. Then you actually tell what you found, and then the conclusion is what are the implications of the study, right? So this is really a everything of the IMRAD format, which is really brought down in very short, crisp, and about 250 words. So this is one of my blogs on abstract writing, and it talks about the purpose. It should be similar to the title. The method should follow that PICO approach, which I've already talked about. Result should have the demographics and the primary outcome. A conclusion should be based on your own study and not a very generic conclusion. And overall, all of these can be modified based on a study design. It's always good to write papers using some checklists. What I have told you are sort of generic to any kind of study, but then checklists really help nail it very well. So this is another great book from one of the great physicians of our times, Atul Gawande, and the book is called the Checklist Manifesto, right? How to get things right. So this is a website which is called the Equator Network. So this is equator-network.org, And this is the homepage of Equator Network. What it says is, so Equator is a mnemonic. So it says, talks about enhancing the quality and transparency of health research. That's Equator. There are different types of studies. So randomized trials, observational studies, systematic reviews, and these are the corresponding checklists which you should use: Consort, Strobe, Prisma, Care, etc. Right. So make it a point to go to this website, familiarize yourself with these checklists and start using them for your own studies. So commonly used checklists are the Strobe, which is used for these are all mnemonics. Strobe is for observational studies, Consort is for randomized trials, Record is for retrospective studies, Care is for case reports. Of course, IMRAD format is part of all of these. That's really the basic framework. And this is a Equator Network, decision tree. So this is a guideline decision tree. Which guidelines should I use for my own work? So let's take a quick example. The first question it asks is, was the research on humans? Was the research on humans? If yes, then you ask the next question: did your research generate quantitative data? That means, do you have data from patients? And of course, if you're doing a proper study, you will have some data. Did you combine and analyze, review the results of previous studies? Which is not right. You haven't looked at all the previous studies. What you've done is original work. So you say no. And then, was your study randomized trial comparing two or more health interventions? Suppose you haven't done that, then you say, one second. Okay, so I think those arrows are missing here. So anyway, so did you combine and analyze results of previous studies? The answer is no. Was your study a randomized trial? If you say no, then did your study explore the relationship between exposure to risk and protective factors and outcomes? If you say yes, now this is a strobe. So this is the strobe checklist which is to be used, right? Suppose, did you combine and analyze results of previous studies? And you say yes. Is it a review of observations, of observational studies? If you say yes, it's Moose. If you say no, it's Prisma, right? So there are some of the guidelines. These are some of the checklists which you will use for writing review articles. Okay, so Consort is the checklist. Strobe is a checklist you will use for observational studies. If you, after no, if you say, was the study a randomized trial? If you say yes, it leads you to the Consort checklist. Right, so this is all available on the website. You can take a look at those. STROVE stands for Strengthening the Reporting of Observational Studies in Epidemiology Initiatives. That's the full form of STROVE. Record stands for Reporting of Studies Conducted Using Observational Routinely Collected Health Data. That is a record. This is the gold standard for writing retrospective studies. This is one of my papers, which was retrospective study. I think we have a couple of minutes. I wanted to show you, how we do it. So this is the record checklist. So what I have done is, I have just initially copied all the questions. So record checklist will have about 20 questions that are non-negotiable. Let's look at those. Record 1.1 says the type of data, the type of data used should be specified in the title or the abstract, right? And comparison, so this is how it was done. A retrospective study. This part is now part of the title. Record 1.2, if applicable, geographic region and time frame should be part. Record 1.3 says if linkage between databases were used, you need to do that, right? Then the way to write abstracts is also there. Initially you are not writing anything, you're just copying that checklist and putting it on a Word document like this. So record statement 2 starts with explain the scientific background and rationale for the investigation being reported, right? So we are writing one statement about each, right? So we are introducing different parts of the study. And so essentially, any study starts with introducing the basics of that study, then showing the problem statement, then actually talking about the potential solution. Then you can write about your own settings. Then record statement 3 talks about state specific objectives, including any pre-specified hypothesis. So what you do is, you talk about that. You talk about you know whatever there is. And to the best of our knowledge, there is no literature showing direct comparison, like I told you even before, right, while writing the introduction. And so this is a terminology which you should always use. This is the best of our To the best of our knowledge, there is no literature showing a comparison, or there is very limited literature for for what I am doing, right? And then record study statement 4 talks about study design. Present key elements of study design early in the paper. You see, just say this was a retrospective study. Record 5 talks about describe the stress, describe the setting. You talk about medical records from this date to this date, etc., etc., right? Record statement 6.2. So what I'm trying to show you is that, now let us go back to the presentation. Just a second. Yeah, so what I was trying to show you is that, once you use these checklists, just copy and paste all these questions on a Word document, and then start answering each question one at a time. Maybe one question a day, which takes you like 20 minutes or so, or maybe half an hour at the most, right? Some questions will take you like 2 minutes, like, this is a retrospective study, and that's it. So if there are 20 questions, you will have a manuscript in 20 days, because if you're writing one or two sentences about each question which is there in that, in that checklist, then your manuscript is ready. So you really need to look at one question at a time, and not fret upon how do I write this large paper, right? So that really helps. Checklists help to break it down into, smaller segments, and write your paper well. This is the final manuscript. I'll quickly try and show you how it looks like. So this is essentially how the entire paper looks like. So uh, yeah, so this is the introduction, and all of this in yellow is basically answers to these questions from that checklist. So I just showed you these, and these were hidden right before. So then, we can't go into the nitty gritties of these, because this is very specific for a particular disease, and that too in the eye itself. So I don't think we need to go into the details of these, but the overall message is that, use these checklists, answer one question at a time, and that will really help you, formulate an entire manuscript relatively quickly. These are some of the blogs on my website. This is a blog on p-values and importance of effect size in clinical research. There are certain blogs on regression analysis. So this is all available on Sengupta Research Academy on the blog section. A lot of others, like, interpreting odds ratios, how to plan a study, sample size in clinical research, etc. So I hope you will take some time off and visit the site and look at some of the blogs, and sort of get to understand. There are about 25, 26 blogs which have been written over a period of last couple of years, and almost all of them are very relevant to what we are discussing today. Thank you so much for all your attention. I'm just going to stop my screen sharing, and we'll go into the Q&A section. Okay. Okay, so I think, yeah, I can see the question. So first question was, what are the benefits of publishing research? So I think we've talked about, just one second. Yeah. So we'll get to the questions one by one. So the first question was, what are the benefits of publishing research? So I think I've talked a little bit about some of those benefits, where, and you can really make a very large impact on people who are basically wanting to use your findings to improve what they are doing, right? So that's a very large kind of picture, that you can influence a lot of people around. And there are so many other things, like fame and recognition, grants and funding, etc. Next question is, how to prove the efficacy of these researches if it is only done through theoretical processes. uh, so I think, from a medical point of view, we are really not doing it only from a theoretical perspective, because we are doing it actually on real world patients, and getting data out of that. So but then, if there are only theoretical processes which can happen when when you're uh, working on other fields, of course, it's important to actually go and apply it on in the real world, isn't it? So we call it RWE in medicine. That's called real world evidence, where a lot of the times we find that whatever those clinical trials or those very controlled experiments are saying is not true in the real world, because there are a lot of differences in the real world setting. And so, like you said, only theoretical processes is probably not good enough. We need to get into the practical or the nitty-gritties of it, and execute those protocols in the real world, and see, and only then we can sort of take it and apply those things. Can you recommend good journals for engineering students? I think IEEE is your major indexing service. So if a journal is indexed in that database, then I think those are journals that you should probably target. So, which type of abstract is common in health economics? Okay, so health economics is slightly different from clinical medicine, where it's being done by others other than doctors. So health economics really deals with, for some of you who are not aware, it deals with something called cost effectiveness, cost utility, some of those kind of aspects. But I think, the way of writing abstracts is very similar, in terms of how you calculated that cost utility, There are certain terminologies called ISER and some of those. So you need to actually tell people how you how you did it, and then what you found, and what are the implications of those things. So overall, I think the this thing remains the same. The sort of way of writing essentially remains the same. Next question: why journals are rejected, and what all mistakes can be avoided to pass the tests? Yeah, so two or three important things. From an editorial point of view, I can tell you that the commonest reason for a journal rejecting your paper is that it does not suit the scope of that journal. Say for example, if you have made an artificial intelligence software to look at medical images, which is very common and happening a lot nowadays. But then that paper is too technical for the doctor to understand. Then it's probably not a good idea to submit to a doctor's journal or a medical journal. A lot of so unless it is going to have some information for the doctor, say in the developmental phase of that AI, it's good to submit and publish your papers with your methodologies, very detailed methodologies in journals which are looking at only AI, right? That is the technical aspects of AI. Once that is done, and then you are actually going and doing a actual study looking at, say, sensitivity, specificity, and some of the other concepts, which will be applicable to a clinician or to a doctor who will use your software. That is a time to actually go ahead and submit it to a medical journal, right? So I think submitting a paper to a journal where it does not satisfy its scope is one of the commonest reasons. Second thing is, most journals will tell you, oh, what's new in this? Paper is not new enough for me to take, that the journal is very competitive. And those are the things you will hear when you submit it to very top notch journals, which have more than, say, 3,000 submissions a year. Then that you will hear it. So it's not new enough is very subjective. A journal which is slightly lower rung will look at it from a different point of view, right? So really depend upon which kind of journal you are targeting. So matching your paper to that journal's requirements is a very important thing to do. Also, common cause of rejection is that you have not followed the journal instructions properly, that your abstract is too long, and that your references are not the way we wanted it to be. And we don't have enough time to go and keep correcting everything that we've submitted, so then it's getting rejected, right? So these are the common causes for rejection, and you can probably address these right at the beginning. Can you share with us the checklist? Yes, so these checklists are freely available to everybody. You can just go to the Equator Network, equator-network.org, or just Google Equator Network, and you will get these checklists. All they're all on the homepage. And also there are, if you toggle through the website, you will find sites. You will find smaller pages on which will help you actually navigate and find the paper, the checklist that is appropriate for your own study. So then just explore the Equator Network website. I think you should get this done. Next question is: does just the checklist for research also applicable to other fields of studies like business administration and management? Unfortunately not, because it's like I said, this Equator Network is mainly for health and allied sciences, right? So essentially what this talk was catering to was about health sciences. However, I'm sure there are going to be other guidelines to write in other academia, and you need to really look for these things. But when you look at some of these checklists, at least you'll get a good idea of what the method should contain. And essentially, it really means what you have exactly done to find that answer. So these 5 or 6 non-negotiables have to be part of that method section. So if you look at the Equator Network guidelines, say for a particular drug trial or something, I'm sure there are going to be still some take-home messages for you to write your method section, even for other specialities. Okay, next question was how to select suitable journal for publication. So again, a great question. Like already told you, also, there are some journal matchers which are there, which are AI driven tools. So you can go to the Web of Science website, or you can go to major publishers like Elsevier or like Nature, and what they have is something called journal matchers, right? So where you need to enter your title of your paper and the abstract, whatever you have written of the paper, and keywords. And once you set that engine in motion, it will suggest about 15 or 20 journals which may be interested in your content. And also they will give you a match score, where a match score of one is the highest match, where so first 3 4 journals that they will display on your on the page will be journals which are most likely to take your papers. And then they give you other information, such as if this is an open access journal, what is its impact factor and other things. So use try and use journal matchers on these websites which are there, and they will really help you. And this is not specific only for medicine, because Elsevier is publishing a huge number of journals, not only health sciences, same way for nature, and the same is for Walters Kluwer and others. So all of these publishers have their own journals. Remember that the journal that they recommend now is going to be part of their own portfolio. It's not going to be a very large list, right? So the largest list will be given to you by Web of Science, which is which runs Scopus, and which has a lot of journals under it. But otherwise, so you need to search all the three databases, say Nature, uh, Web of Science, and Elsevier. Once you have, so you will at least have a list of 7 or 8 journals which you can then target. Remember that this all will depend upon the kind of abstract you've written, if your keywords are good or not, and if your title is conveying what you should. But if they are not written well, then those matches are not going to work much. Okay, next question: can you list the books you recommended again? So one was 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. One was Michael O'Grady, and the book was Think Smart, Work Smart. And the last book that I suggested was by Atul Gawande, and that's called The Checklist Manifesto. Okay, what role does impact factor play when it comes to published papers? The impact factor really is from a journal's point of view, or how much impact a journal is having on the academic world, right? So impact factor really means, is the content that you are publishing getting cited by others, right? So if you are publishing good enough content, that then all your papers will start getting cited by others, right? So it really depends upon the number of citations you have in the next 2 years, right? So that is impact factor. So higher the impact factor, the better the journal standing, or the better the journal's quality, right? So that is one way of grading journals. It's not always accurate, but impact factor can be used for that. So if you're looking to submit a paper, and you have 3 or 4 in mind, and then you may make a choice based on the impact factor and submit to the journal which has the highest impact factor. Remember that that is the most cited journal, or that is probably the best journal. So the chances of acceptance are also lower, right? Their rejection rates are higher. Some journals have a 90% rejection rate. So then temper down your expectations when you're submitting to very high impact journals, right? So but then generally we want to submit to a journal which has the highest impact factor, essentially. Next question is, which section of the article has to be started first? Is it results and methods? Again, a great question. And I think the method section is easiest to write, and it should be written even before you even start your own study, right? Because you should be very clear what you want to do, and how you want to do it. So method is easy to write, because you are actually doing it on a daily basis, right? It could be retrospective or a prospective, or whatever that may be. So the method section essentially is the easiest to write, and that's why I do it first. Then what I do is, my methods are ready. Once my results are out and analyzed, then I write the results section of the paper. And from the methods and the results, now I really know what are the outcomes, or what are the question I asked, and what are the outcomes I got. Then what I do is, now I have to compare and see what others have found about this, right? So then I write the discussion. Actually, then I write the introduction. Many times the introduction and the discussion could overlap, and may look very similar. So the introduction has to be much shorter, of course, like I said, and it should zoom into the question of interest. So introduction you could write even at the beginning or at the end, but I generally write it later. So how I do it is, I write the methods first, then the results, then I write the discussion, then I write the introduction. So the IMRAD is now complete. Then I go on, I sit on it for about at least 2 weeks. Then I write the abstract, because now I really know what is working, what is not. So I think that is essentially what most people with high number of publications do. Can you please give a brief about retrospective study and its significance? So retrospective study is a little lower at the strung of evidence that you're producing, because remember that you can't control anything, right? Everything has happened already. and data is already in your data bank or in your case files that you're looking at for patients. So everything is now done. So what you now need to extract is what you were wanting to extract, right? So then you could selectively extract things and show results which are not true, right? So that is one way of looking at it. So retrospective study, the credibility of retrospective studies is slightly lower. However, when you have very very large samples, then that really gives retrospective studies the backbone. So retrospective studies should have large samples, should ask a meaningful question, a question which is answerable mostly by retrospective study and not by a prospective study. Say risk factors for an outcome. Say risk factors for an infection which happens after cataract operation in the eye, or after any kind of procedure in the medical field. Say it could be urology procedure, it could be a cardiac stenting or whatever that may be. So the number of complications are so low that it's very difficult to actually do a prospective study. So then something like that can be looked at from a retrospective point of view, or like I said, a complication, or risk factors for certain outcomes. So that can be actually looked at from retrospective point of view. Remember, any study can be done from both angles, from prospective as well as retrospective. A prospective is better because you can control certain variables, right? You can keep it controlled in a particular way, say doing masking or something like that. And then your results will be more robust, isn't it? Because all those other confounders, all the things which could influence your outcomes, have now been taken care of. But retrospective studies, you can't do that. So but then you can do any study in a prospective or a retrospective manner. Next question: can I ask, in what search engine or website will you recommend in searching some scholars to cite in the manuscript? Mm, can I, so essentially in the medical field, search engine that we really use is called PubMed, or it is maintained by the National Institutes of Health in the US. So PubMed is pretty much the main website for medical studies. So that is a real database. And for engineering, it's IEEE, which is very similar, where most data which is getting published is getting archived in these databases. So searching for any particular study should really start with a PubMed or an IEEE search. Next question: one of the important parts of research paper is reference and citations. Kindly share your inputs on this. Yeah, so reference and citations, we didn't have enough time to get into a lot of the nitty-gritties, but what you can actually, of course, there are two ways of doing it. One is, of course, doing it manually, where you change the references as and when the paper is being modified by others. The other is to use reference managers. And there are two free reference managers which are really good. One is called Zotero, Zotero, Zotero. So this is again a free tool, and you can use Zotero, and there are a lot of videos on that website which teach you how to use it, and trust me, it's relatively easy. And the other is called Mendeley. So Mendeley is also really nice. It's easy to use, easy to collaborate with others using the same reference manager. So think about using reference managers. It really reduces your pain, especially when you have very large number of references, say 50, 60, 70, and others are changing. You send it to a list of co-authors, and some of them have actually changed the whole sequence of writing, where reference 3 becomes reference 20, and say reference 50 becomes reference 4. Now that is almost impossible to do from a manual point of view, right? So using these reference managers, it becomes automated. Like we talked about automations and all these coming in, but some of them are really helping and reducing our effort. So use reference managers. The two to look out for are Zotero and Mendeley. And EndNote is a paid service which is also available. It's really really good, much easier, but it's a paid service. One of the most important parts, referencing, and this is done. One piece of advice you would give to someone who is beginner looking to publish in a journal. Yeah, so first thing is, you should really train yourself well even before venturing into this, because it becomes very difficult and you will face too many rejections later on. So train yourself well. If somebody tells you to fly a plane without at all knowing how to do this, it's impossible, right? The same thing is true for any researcher who is trying to write papers. So train yourself well. I think that is a very important part. One second thing is, read and read a lot of papers, right? Once you read, that kind of language starts, you start imbibing all of those language, you start imbibing that way of writing, and gradually it translates into your own writings. So read as much as you can on that subject, and when you start writing, your language is automatically going to be very refined. And lastly, you can use help from services like Editage and others who provide service to write papers, and the whole quality of your paper really comes up. So remember that most editors are able to pick up articles submitted by absolute novices from those who are submitted, from those papers which are submitted by experienced researchers. So we can just look at just the abstract or even the way the title is, and you can make out, oh, this is a fresh author. And not that it reduces your chances of acceptance, but just that it's relatively clear. So if you use a writing service and some help, it will improve your paper. It will be a great learning experience as well, and the chances of acceptance are also higher. So and sort of sum it all up, it's important to address a gap in literature. If something which has already been done many times and you are redoing it, it doesn't have much value. So you need to first find a gap in literature, engage all your efforts towards filling that gap, and then writing it well. So that generally is, I think, initial tips for people who are starting out. Do the page number of an article is a matter of article to be accepted or rejected by the editor? I'm not sure I understand the question well. Page number, you mean the number of pages that are submitted, right? So, not really, because of course, the word limit is there, and it's not just the number of pages; it is the word limit, and spacing of two with a font size of 12 is generally what most editors would want to look at. So, essentially, a paper which is 300 words would come into about 6 or 7 word document pages, right? So if it's unless it's something which is invited, or a review article which is much longer. But then so remember that it should be very concise, isn't it? Writing too much is never good. So everything which should be which is in your mind should be within 3000 to 3500 words. That's pretty much it. So about 6 to 7 word document pages, excluding references, right? And also, when you're citing references, citing too many references for an original article is again never that good, because if you have 40 or 45 references to show, that means already so much work has been done on this, right? So then cite very less references, as few as you can, but still to sort of uh, get your point across. But then about 15, 16 references for an original article is perfect. It's great. Anything more than 20, and certainly as an editor I start seeing, oh, too much work, volume of work has been done on this. So what is new? So then I again go back to your introduction and see, if the author has actually mentioned about that gap in literature, right? So overall, I think that page number doesn't matter, but your overall word count is what most journals would look for. Can we use paraphrasing and summarizing tools? Uh, I'm not exactly sure again what you mean by paraphrasing and summarizing tools, though. Uh, so if you mean by automated writing apps and some of these, they will help you summarize and paraphrase in a language which is it's more amenable to get accepted. You could do that, but like I said in the beginning, chat gpt and others have really come in a big way. There are some websites, some writing tools called Jasper, which is even better than chat gpt for medical manuscripts, and there's so many others which are now coming up, right? So you could actually use them, but you know I would not really recommend straight away copy pasting that as a part of your manuscript, right? Go over it, modify it, give it that human touch, isn't it? So whatever tool you're using, unless you go over it and you give it your best, it's not going to get through. So and remember, now journals are really looking out for these things, where they want to see whether it's actually written by a human or by a machine. So then there's a lot of thought going into in the editorial world on these things. So be careful when you straight away use these and submit to journals. I think you've come to the is there another question? Yeah, so content for chat gpt is counted in plagiarism now. Yeah, so not yet. because plagiarism software are not yet able to pick up. So how do we say there is plagiarism or not? We use software which are standardized, and most of the time we use software called Authenticate. So what it's really going to do is, so there is a version of Authenticate called, I think, Authenticate 2.0, which is now AI powered as well. So what it will tell us is whether anything that is on screen, excluding images, of course, anything that is on screen is already published somewhere or not, in any in any form of literature. It could be a book, it could be a simple pamphlet on Google or somewhere like that. So anything which is published before, it will tell us. However, who has written that is out of the scope of Authenticate at present. So if something is written by Chat GPT, currently it is almost impossible for us to tell using Authenticate. And Chat GPT knows that there are plagiarism checks. So most of the times, even if you give it the same content, that output is different. Many times the outputs are all different. So then it's not really plagiarism at present. But then these are all gray areas and are still evolving. So we'll see how this goes. Next question is, can you share with us a link to the Journal for Health Economics? I don't think there are any particular journals specifically for health economics where, so if you're looking at, say like my field of ophthalmology, most top journals will want to, publish large papers on health economics, which are impacting how we do it. So, uh, health economics, I'm sure there are particular journals for those, but then, who matters in the end is people who are using that software or that machine or that whatever you're analyzing, right? So that unless they get to hear about it, it's futile. So then if you are very sure of what you're doing, go and submit it to that clinical journal, and the end reader should be that physician who is actually utilizing, because he's going to use that information to make decisions for his patients. So then health economics papers should still be submitted to mainstream journals of that particular specialty, is what I think. I think we've come to the end of the questions.
So,
Thank you
thank
so
you,
much,
Dr. Sengupta.
Dr. Sengupta. Thank you so much for your generosity in answering all the questions very patiently, and also sharing your immense knowledge with all the participants. And it was highly beneficial. And coming to the end of the session, I would like to pass on the session to Ms. Vasundhara for a vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkatesh. Thank you, Dr. Sengupta, for the wonderful session. So I think the points you discussed, they were really very insightful, and I hope the
Thank you.
participants, they have gained a lot of benefit from this session. And it was really very nice that you took up all the questions and answered all of them without even leaving a question. So it was really very helpful. And I would also like to thank Nimbus for giving us an opportunity to Cactus Communications to host this session. So, given an opportunity, we wish to conduct many more such sessions to help the researchers so that they can achieve their dreams. And finally, a big thanks to all the participants for attending this webinar on a weekend. So, I understand how much time you would have spent here. So, hope this session has helped you in gaining a lot of insights regarding research. So, thank you one and all, and have a nice weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vasundhara. Thank you, Venkatesh, and thank you everyone for being part of this session. And I hope it made some sense at some level or the other. And we'll hope to conduct some more sessions going ahead. Thank you so much.
Ending the session now. Thank you, everyone.